So we're back talking about the Tangled show. And specifically, I want to talk about a major gripe I had with the show. Don't get me wrong, I thought the series as a whole was really awesome. After all, Tangled's probably one of my favourite Disney films. Just one of my favourite animated films in general. It's so fun and sweet and picturesque. Like reading a comforting story in bed at night when it's raining and you're warm inside. You know the vibe. But as with anything, there's room for improvement, right? And I think the major place that the show sometimes comes a wee bit unstuck is in the quality of the writing. Not to the point that the show's ever unwatchable or bad, but enough that after all said and done, you sometimes can't help but sit there and think, that didn't quite make a lot of sense. That felt out of character. It's a tale as old as time, and since one of my favourite hobbies is to overanalyze everything to the nth degree, this is the type of stuff that keeps me up at night or distracts me as I'm going about my day. And so I need to get these thoughts out of my head and into a video so I can lock them away and not think about them ever again. And for me, one of the storylines that really just perpetuates that feeling within is just how Varian's villain arc went. His story had so much promise when he was introduced, but in the end it felt like he got done extremely dirty by the writing. And in a way that impacted the story and arcs of a bunch of other characters within the show and made their characters not make all that much sense at times. Characters like Rapunzel, most significantly. It's one of those storylines that you look back on in hindsight and think, this doesn't feel quite right. Doesn't make sense for his character or her character or whatever character you want to talk about. And I hate that feeling because it keeps me from really just appreciating things until I get it out. But first we have to set the scene of what I'm talking about here. We have to introduce Varian's storyline so we can see why I don't think it treated him very well, or why it doesn't really make sense in the context of the world and the characters that we know. Now, fans of the show will know that Varian is a deeply popular character within the fanbase. Like seriously, he's probably not on the level of characters like Rapunzel or Eugene, although I have seen some Rapunzel haters on social media when discussing the show from time to time, and they can be rather fierce. But regardless, those two are probably the most popular characters from the overall franchise, followed up by the likes of Varian. And honestly, if he'd been in a film like the other two have, he probably would be able to get to that level if you ask me. But not only is he a popular character, but for much of the story, he's also a very important character. We first meet Varian rather early on in season 1 in the episode What the Hair, where he's enlisted to help with the secret of Rapunzel's hair. And here he's established as a rather quirky and enthusiastic young alchemist who, whilst good intentioned and kind, is also a bit reckless and doesn't always think things through when enacting his grand schemes and plans to improve the lives of his fellow villagers, and this causes chaos and leads to a somewhat troubled dynamic with his father. And so whilst Team Rapunzel do like him in theory, in practice he can be a nuisance who gets in the way and is in many ways a walking disaster. I mean, in his debut episode, the dude almost blows up his home village. It's not exactly ideal, and in reality, it would be annoying to deal with. Anyway, we keep the wholesome vibes throughout his next appearance. He enters this big science competition, seems like he has a crush on Cass, she helps him with his project, and it's all good. But at this stage of the story, he's still a relatively minor character overall. And it's not until The Queen for a Day that it really starts to have a proper storyline all of his own that gives him more characterization, gives him an arc that spans across more than one episode, and also just ties back into that main story mystery of the Black Rocks. After finding these Black Rocks are beginning to encroach on Old Corona and are destroying everything, Varian convinces his father to go to the king, but nothing's done about it, with his father lying to everybody and brushing it off, which leads to Varian experimenting, and of course, said experiment goes wrong and begins to encase his father in unbreakable amber. So Varian goes to Rapunzel, who'd promised earlier that she would try to help him out. And so yeah, he goes to Corona, only to find a disaster zone. He tries to get her to help him, and she can't because she has to think of the greater good of the kingdom, which is in a state of disaster at the time of his arrival due to a blizzard, and the fact that her parents have gone missing. And it gets to the point that she lets him get dragged out by the guards. Whew! And we'll talk about that later. And in this time, his dad gets fully encased in amber, and Varian begins to snap. First tricking Rapunzel into helping him steal the remains of the Sundrop flower so he can try to free his father himself. And when that fails, he realizes that Rapunzel is the new Sundrop, and thus, only she can break the amber. And so he decides that now's as good a time as any to become a villain, and over the course of the last part of the season 1, he becomes the main antagonist of the story, culminating in him attacking Corona and kidnapping the Queen, before being defeated by Rapunzel and imprisoned. And all of this happens at the end of season 1. And throughout season 2, you don't really see him again, except for like a single vision on the island with the little leaf people. Season 2 is more about building up Rapunzel and the team dynamics, revealing the mystery of the rocks, and also building to that big betrayal by Cass at the end of the season as a springboard into season 3. And then there's word from Ulf, I think his name is, the mime, that Corona's in danger, and turns out that they could have taken a hot air balloon to the Dark Kingdom and back, and avoided literally all the pitfalls and not been gone for Corona for like a year. Whoops, who knew? Anyway, it's revealed that Varian's joined up with Seporian separatists, with his intention being to wipe the memories of everybody in Corona so they'll forget all about the things he did and accept him as part of the kingdom again. But of course, the Sapporians just want to raze Corona to the ground, so he betrays them and joins Rapunzel, and he gets pardoned at the end, and they accept him back into the team and guide him towards his own redemption. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, I don't understand, Smarty Pants. What about all that don't you like? Well, a couple of things. Originally, my first thought was always just, wow, Varian got chucked in the slammer for a year, and yet Cass is not punished at all. Seems she gets off scot-free despite being far worse in terms of the things she does. You know, she brings back Zantiri. That's pretty bad. And yet she's not only not imprisoned, but she's just allowed to do whatever she wants and travel the world to find herself, or whatever it was she was going to do. So already there's this strange disparity in narrative consequences, where an actual child, Varian, after all he's 14 during the course of Season 1, is thrown into a prison after he has a mental breakdown which radicalized him and turned him violent. So yeah, he gets tossed in prison. And this would be fair enough if adult Cassandra didn't do so much worse for much less punishment. Once again, I'll emphasize, a year in prison! That is so harsh compared to what she got, yikes. But like I said, that's only part of it. But it did kind of get soothed by the fact that Varian's arc during Season 3 is very compelling and interesting. One of my favourite characters during that season. So you do sort of overlook it at times. But here's my deep cut. I think his original fall to villainy and how that was handled, it made sense, don't get me wrong, from a character point of view, he felt like he had been betrayed by Rapunzel, that she'd abandoned him, and didn't seem to care that his father was gone and his homeland was destroyed. And on top of that, the people of Corona started to shun him. Pretty sure he says that they attacked him too, and even then, he isn't too far gone. He's cold and distant, uses her for his own ends to try to steal the Sundrop from the Corona vaults, even though Rapunzel had only agreed to help him because it would apparently help Corona. So she didn't even help him for him. And then, and only after his plan to use the flower fails and he realizes the only way to save his dad is to use Rapunzel, somebody who in his eyes had already betrayed him once before, only then does he go full villain. And so in that way, his character's fall into darkness makes a lot of sense. And on top of that, it was interesting, sympathetic, compelling. You could very much see where he was coming from and hope that he'd get some sort of redemption arc. It was well paced, they didn't rush him. I really like that they gave him one episode where he just steals the flower. I think too often when a writer does a hero to villain arc, the previously kind and compassionate character instantly swaps morality and does things that doesn't make sense that they'd be okay with doing, at least at first. So the fact that they eased him into it, and they make him even more desperate, is good writing to me. What I'm less certain about in terms of the writing is just the whole scenario that gets him into this mess. Because whilst it would make sense from a Varian point of view, and writing perspective that he would be stubborn in regards to finding out how to get rid of the rocks and save his dad because they are wrecking his house, and he is careless, so getting his dad ambered makes sense too. Plus he's idealistic and he's under extreme pressure and stress, so he feels massively betrayed by Rapunzel and turns on her. That all makes sense from his POV. But to me, what makes less sense is Rapunzel. I don't think there's an episode either before or since that arc where she treats a friend so badly, so carelessly. The dude comes to her castle after she'd promised she'd help him and begs for her help because he thinks his dad is going to die. Now, obviously, she can't help him. There's the blizzard, her parents are missing, and she needs to be in Corona to act as queen. But Rapunzel, in any other episode, no matter the situation or stressor, I think would do far better than allow him to be dragged away from her by the guards as he calls out to her. And seemingly he gets tossed back out into the blizzard. And then even after that, I swear she doesn't even go to check on him or anything. Not right away at least, despite knowing that he'd be deeply upset. She just leaves it. Remember when she found out that Monty didn't like her? Whole other video on that guy, by the way, but she spends a whole episode obsessing about it. Here, she leaves him be for a couple of episodes. It just feels like so different to how her character usually behaves. And when she does go looking for Varian, it's because he'd left her a message in the first place. Damn. Look at the way she's so ride or die for Cass, or any other relatively minor character she's ever met. It just feels like a forced mistake on her part. I mean, mistakes in writing and making characters have flaws, it is fine, and it can be very good. But this is one that doesn't make sense because it's utterly contradictory to her character to the point that it feels forced. And thus, Varian is left alone for longer and he falls into villainy. I feel like in reality, the first thing Rapunzel would do, at least when the blizzard subsides and her parents are back, is go look for him to give him the help he needs, which probably would have pulled him back from the brink because he would have seen that she's sorry and that she's full steam ahead in helping him. And in fact, I don't think if it was written properly, she would have even let him get dragged out in the first place. She would have kept him by her side. But like I said, I think she normally would, but it feels like the hand of God, the hand of writers, the pencil of the writers, it was all on the scales. And thus, poor Varian turns to villainy and eats a year-long prison sentence for his troubles in a way that makes sense for his character, but not for Rapunzel's, and makes her seem really compassionless for this boy. Whew. But yeah, beyond that, not really much else to say about Varian and Rapunzel's story. I just think it was kind of poorly done. But of course, these have all just been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about what I've said about Varian and Rapunzel? Are you with me? Maybe you disagree? Have any other thoughts? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.